All right, welcome everybody to the Fantasy Files podcast, episode 2, where we talk about our favorite fantasy-related novels and topics. I'm Spencer here with my fellow co-host Gabe. How you doing, Gabe?
Wonderful, thank you.
As I mentioned last time, guys, this episode was going to be Kingstark Tidings, but for that episode, we're actually going to have a guest on, and he's trying to catch up right now. So, in the meantime, we might have a couple episodes where we just talk about our favorite topics in fantasy. We might have a Mistborn book discussion. Uh, we'll find something to fill the time, but that episode might be, a few out or something. Today we'll talk about some of our favorite characters in the fantasy genre, not necessarily main characters, but just some of our favorite characters that we really liked the arc of, or that just really kind of caught our attention during our reads. Along with that, I'll pitch a few of my favorite books that you guys might not have heard of to you and to Gabe. They're definitely books that Gabe hasn't read yet.
Yep,
And then
I have not
we'll,
read any fantasy books on paper yet. It's all
yeah,
audible.
yeah. So most of these books that I'll pitch are either paper only or are better on paper. There's a couple books in there that have audiobook versions. One of them we tried listening to, but it was so bad that we couldn't get through the
Yeah,
audio.
yep, I remember that.
Um, yeah. So and then also we've been reading Mistborn with so many recommendations from other podcasts. Specifically the guys over at Friends Talking Fantasy, they mentioned that book a lot. And so I was like, you know what? It's time. I've been reading fantasy for well over a decade, and it's time to read Mistborn. That's kind of a big staple of fantasy. So it's both of our first time reading that, and
Yep,
I think we're enjoying it so far. It's not exactly what I expected, but I'm surprised how much I like it. Um,
couldn't agree more.
All right, so for what we're gonna do for talking about our favorite characters, we're gonna try to keep it spoiler friendly, meaning light spoilers, not necessarily no spoilers. If we do get into an area where we're gonna talk about heavy spoilers, I will let you guys know, and then we will carry on with the spoiler section, and then that'll be a time for you to either mute the podcast or fast forward, and then I'll lift my hand up or Gabe will lift his hand up, and then you'll know that you can turn your volume back up. I'm also I'm not too experienced with it, but I'm also going to try to add timestamps to the YouTube video so that if there's a couple of these characters in particular where there's just really going to be no avoiding spoilers. So you can just kind of flip through the characters on the annotations and timestamps. All right. Let's see. Other than that, anything else you can think of, Gabe?
No, I think you nailed it, man.
All right. So let's go into our favorite characters in fantasy. Like I said, these are characters that maybe they didn't necessarily like steal the show. Maybe they weren't the main characters. A lot of them are, but these are characters that really touched us in several ways, and characters that we really enjoyed. So let's talk about Kylar Stern from the Night
Oh,
Angel trilogy.
here we
Uh,
go, man.
this is a series that'll be coming up on our podcast. We're probably a few episodes away from it, but I definitely want to get to this series at some point. It's actually been a while since I read it. I think Gabe might have even reread it more
I did,
recently
yeah,
than I
I
have.
did a reread probably maybe a month ago, I think, somewhere
Yeah.
around there.
So being so fresh off it, what are your main thoughts on Kyler Stern?
Kylar Stern. Well, I think what's cool, and I don't really know if this is gonna be a spoiler or not, I don't think it is, but it's it's this kid is so like so weak, right? And so beaten down and this, that, and the other. And then him turning that around is, I think, probably what stood out to me the most, I guess. I'm trying not
Yeah.
to like say specific details.
Well, yeah, I think, as we find him in the first book, he's kind of this like gutter rat.
Yep, gutter
And
shite.
gutter shite.
Yeah,
And he's part of a they were like a thieving guild, right? They were kind of
yeah,
guild
they
rats.
were,
I can't remember if it
yep,
was
guild
thieving guild
rats.
specifically, but
No, that's what he said. It was guild rats. I can't remember the name of their guild, but
I
that's,
can't
yeah, that's what
either.
it was.
But yeah, we kind of, we see him in this like really desperate time of his life where he's literally fighting to survive. And the very the very best he can do to get out of that situation is to become apprenticed by the best assassin.
Yeah,
At the time, he doesn't really know who Durzo is. Like, he doesn't know that Durzo is like the best assassin, but he knows he's a really good one. And so he goes to get apprenticed by him. And that kind of leads into, Durzo kind of trains him and teaches him how to be like this amazing assassin. And it kind of leads into the rest of the story. Um, Something that I've always kind of thought was funny about Kylar is he's not, we read some of these characters where they are like so clever and they always have like something in their back pocket. They always have like a plan B, and they're always able to like make something happen. And Kylar, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily call him like clever. Like, he doesn't always think things all the way through. He does like kind of what his heart tells him to and like what he believes to be right. But even though he may not be this guy with like the master plan or anything, he's got a crazy amount of skill. So he kind of finds himself in these situations and he's able to like make his way through the situation just by pure luck, skill, and determination. And
yeah,
it's really fun to see how he works things out, because he doesn't usually like get into a situation and then near the end of it he's like, oh, this is where my master plan comes into play. Mostly it's like, oh, I'm in trouble right now, like I guess I'll try this thing, and then it
yeah. It's
like
like, oh
works.
wow, I'm glad that worked.
Yeah,
Thank God that worked.
yeah. um and yeah, I would say he's like funny and charming. He never quite loses his I mean, he grows up a lot, but he never really becomes like a noble. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
He's always kind of got like this rough exterior. He's still got a little bit of that gutter
guild
shite
rat.
in him.
Yep, that guild rat inside of him.
Yeah. And but he believes in his friends a lot, and he fights for what he believes is right, even when Durzo, and we'll talk about Durzo in a little bit, but Durzo is much harder of a person. He is he, at the beginning at least, Durzo has a great character arc, but at the
Yeah,
beginning he's telling Kylar like you need to leave like all these friends you think you have and all these people you think you love, like you need to leave that all behind and just focus on killing people for money.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and Kylar is kind of like, there's a big part of that he believes in. He enjoys being apprenticed by Durzo, but there's a part of him that really believes in people and doing the right thing and trying to make a better life for himself. And we especially see that in book two. I forget what the name of the second book is, but in book two.
I always mix up the names of all three of them because they're so
I,
similar. Like Beyond the Shadows, the Perfect Shadow, and then what's then one more that has to do with shadows.
Yeah, so I think it's the Way of Shadows. So it's, I don't know what order they're in, but I know the first one is Way of Shadows, and then the last two are Beyond the Shadows and the Shadow's Edge. And then
Okay, that was it. Shadow's Edge.
the perfect shadow is Durzo's side story. Did you ever read that?
Honestly, I can't remember if I did. I didn't do it on this reread, but I can't remember when you first showed me this book if I went back and read it. So
It's
I'll
really
have to
good.
check and see. Yeah, I believe it. I'd be super interested to see. I really don't think I did.
It's really cool. It talks about it's like everything that happens right before he meets Kylar. Or no, it takes
Oh,
place not right before.
but like his past, like
Yeah,
further back.
so it takes place when Durzo first meets Mama K.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah. So
That's good.
it was really good.
Sweet.
You got here Oberon. You want to talk
Oh
about
yeah,
Oberon?
yeah, for sure. So let me just preface these two. It's actually two, I guess, characters. I mentioned another book, but both of them, they're both dogs, and I'm, big dog lover. And I think when dogs are attributed like intelligence or like a human level intelligence in these books, it really just fascinates me because they can take it in, any way they wish, but it stands out to the point where it's like super cool. So Oberon, first of all, I guess Iron Druid Chronicles, you got a 2,000-year-old druid named Atticus. That's like the series is just about his like blight with all these Greek gods or like Greek mythology. So he has a dog named Oberon who he like made this link with, and so he can talk to him. And the dog's like super smart, hilarious. Probably one of the funniest characters in the books, I would say, is that dog. And so me being who I am, that just cracks me up. And then the
Yeah.
other one is The Watchers by Dean Koontz. And so in that book, I would say that this is probably the better one. But there's a dog in there named Einstein that was made in a lab. He's like made to have human level intelligence, and the entire story is around him. And I think it's super, super good.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't read too much of Iron Druid Chronicles, but I did really like The Watcher. I loved Einstein.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Oberon, I can't remember too much about his character, but I remember him being kind of the comic relief.
Yeah, yep. He's like this goofy, like Scooby-Doo type kind of character almost.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I almost want to read Iron Druids or Iron Druid Chronicles on paper, because I
Yeah.
think it might have been, I remember not liking
Oh, the voice.
the voice of
Yeah,
Oberon.
yeah.
I
I've
felt
heard
like
that
it was
from,
kind of cringy.
yep, it is kind of cringy. I've heard that from a couple people.
All right, how big of a player, without spoilers, how big of a player does Oberon become in the later books?
So I think throughout the entire series, like almost every book, he doesn't get like to be this like intense like main character, but through every book, like he is kind of a pivot point for Atticus. Like uh Atticus kind of relies on him for some things, whereas Oberon relies on, so they always have reasons that like they need each other to help each other. He doesn't become like the pinnacle, but
Right.
he's always an important character, I guess. Not like the important character, but every single book like uses him in well, I would say.
Okay. Who in the relationship between Atticus and Oberon, who is like, if at all, again, I haven't really read a whole lot of it, but is it a kind of relationship where like one is teaching the other, like Atticus is teaching Oberon how to be like, kind of like this druidic good person kind of thing, or is Oberon teaching Atticus how to be, you know, I don't know. Are either of
No, no,
them?
yep. I say I understand what you're saying. So Atticus doesn't really teach like the dog about Druidic stuff. I would say that mainly it would be kind of a comic relief thing. Although
Yeah.
the dog, doesn't quite teach him, but helps him out a bunch. But a lot of the time, the dog's just like giving him crap and messing with him and, doing more like more stuff like that, comic relief
Right.
style stuff.
Okay. Oh, you know what? I didn't put it down in the notes, but speaking of comic relief sidekicks, we should talk about Bob from the Dresden
Oh,
Files.
yeah. Yeah, no
Dude,
kidding. I'm
I,
surprised that that's not in there.
dude, I probably don't have much to say on him, honestly, but
Yeah.
Bob is like one of the best comic reliefs that I've read in fantasy.
Yep.
And like Harry relies on him for all this information, and throughout the series we get a little bit of insight into Bob's backstory, and we still, even with the latest book, we still don't know a whole lot about him, but
Yeah.
it's always interesting to kind of get some insight into that. But he's so funny, and he can be used in so many different ways. Like
Yep.
he's used for parts in the magic, like parts in the, not rituals, but he can be used for magic. And he can
Yep. He'd be
like,
used to create like little shields for people and stuff, like if they need him to.
yeah, and he can like take possession of the cat. I always think
Yeah.
it's super funny
Yeah.
whenever
Yep.
like Harry lets him out of the skull and he like goes on a patrol in the cat.
And that's what Harry bribes him with. He's like, all right, if you do this
Yeah,
for me, I'll let you take the cat out for 24. You get a 24-hour pass.
yeah.
24-hour pass in the cat.
And there was one time where Harry was like, I heard like there was this crazy thing that happened at the sorority at the local college or whatever, and
Yeah.
somehow the
Yep.
cat was involved in it. So
Yeah. Good old Bob, man.
Bob is like what's the right word for it?
He's like a sexual deviant is is
Yes.
is is what I'm gonna say.
Yes.
Most definitely.
Anytime he gets let out, he'll go to like a strip club or
Yep.
go to the
Trying to,
sorority or
like
something.
peeping Tom and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And he loves to read like very very intense romance novels too. Like that was like and that's like the first thing, like when you meet Bob, like that's kind of like that's the thing that like I was like, oh, this guy over here, just has this like stack of like romance and like always talking
That's,
about Molly and how hot she is.
oh yeah. And that's nubile. That's
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah. Yeah, dude. Yep. That's exactly what he says.
um but that's the interesting thing about him too, is that Harry mentions because Bob is an intellect of, or a spirit of intellect,
Yep.
Harry wonders if when Bob reads those books, if they are like a somewhat of a sibling to him. Do you remember this at all? Where he's
I do
like,
vaguely. I remember the conversation, but I can't remember because there's something about like knowledge or, well, I
yeah,
guess
because
you
he's a
said it,
spirit of knowledge
intelligence.
and intellect. And
And that's what books are, knowledge.
right.
Yeah.
And so I think it was when Harry went into his skull and got to see like what Bob sees. And
Oh,
I
yeah, yeah,
think
yeah.
I think he was commenting, it was sometime around there where he was commenting on like, is this what Bob sees when he reads these books? Like, are possibly the people in these books like somewhat of a sibling to him? And I always
Yep.
thought that was super interesting. I wonder
Yep.
if
I
we could do
agree.
more about it.
I totally agree.
All right, you put Durzo Blint from the Night Angel trilogy in here. Did you have anything specifically you want to say about him?
You kind of already covered some of the stuff that I was gonna say, but like at first, like he's just like heartless, murdering, thieving, just like an all around like very dark person, right?
Yeah,
Super dark. And he stays that way and he starts teaching Kylar and training with Kylar and this, that. But then you see him start to like kind of start to care about Kylar, like he just kind of gives a little bit and a little bit and a little bit more. And so I think I think that's a cool, because like this guy, like at the beginning, like you're like, this guy is just gonna end up like dead with no happiness, nothing. He's so angry,
Yeah.
but then he starts to like, uh, you start to see the humanity in him, I guess. And so
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. I really liked Durzo's arc. I definitely, during my first few read-throughs, I definitely cared a lot more about Kylar than I did Durzo. Apparently, there's a big part of the fan base. Okay, spoilers, so mute if you need to. Um, there's a big part of the fan base that was really, really upset when Durzo died at the end of the first book.
Oh yeah.
Um, and like apparently I didn't realize how big of a deal it was. Apparently there's like a big like part of the reader base that was like super upset that, you know, they got introduced to this character, and then they just killed him off in the first book.
And it must have been before the other books had come out, right? Because like, again, spoiler here, but like he comes back, he's not dead. So I
Right.
wonder if that was before they wrote the second one, and then they're like, oh, okay, he fixed it, you know?
Yeah. So that it makes me kind of wonder if he saw that like fan reaction and was
Yeah.
like, oh, I need to
All
like
right, I
write
gotta
him
change
back
this.
in or something.
Yep.
But yeah, there's a pretty big part of the fan base that's still kind of upset, like, oh, I wish we had gotten more Durzo, and I never really felt that when I read it. When I read the first book and he died, I thought it felt really satisfying. Like it was really like not like I was happy to see Durzo go, but it felt like a very fitting like this is
Moment.
a yeah, this is like a pinnacle
Yeah.
moment for Kylar where he
Yep.
has to kill
Yep.
his instructor and his person who's been his friend for like 15 years or 10
Yeah,
years
and
or
the only
whatever.
person that's given him the time of day to like train him and to like spend time with him, even though it was pretty rough a lot of the
Yeah,
time for Kylar, but still like that was Durzo's way of like showing love, right? It's
right.
kind of like a tough love style.
Definitely. And I mean, since we're in a spoiler section anyway, when he comes back, I thought I think they I think they telegraphed it a little too soon. I would have liked it to have been like into the third book, and then all of a sudden he finds out that he comes back, which is pretty much what happened. But
Yeah,
after rereading one of the last times, I was like, oh, I can see. Even though I know what's going to happen, I'm like, I can
yeah.
see where they telegraphed this way in advance. And so I
Mm.
wish they had done that a little bit later. But when he does come back, it's like really satisfying. It's like, I remember the first time reading that and being like, oh, he's back. Like, this is
Yeah,
so
yeah.
awesome. This is crazy. Um, so yeah, love Durzo.
Yep. Yep.
We done with spoilers for him.
Yep.
Spoilers
All done.
over. Yeah, the only other thing I got for Durzo is he's always several steps ahead. He's kind of the opposite to Kylar, and maybe Kylar will eventually become like him, but where Kylar kind of like bumbles through his missions and he's kind of figuring it out as he goes,
Yep.
Durzo always has like this master plan that
Very
like
precise.
yeah, like he knows things like years in advance. Like he knows his whole like every step he needs to take to get to the end, and he's thrown a few curveballs, but for the most part he really knows what he's doing, and
For
um,
sure.
he always plans things really well. Super skilled. Uh, all right. Should we talk about Kvothe? Do we have much to say about him other than what we said in the other episode?
Yeah, I don't know if there's more than if they want to know about Kvothe, our last video is dedicated to Kvothe.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think they're probably good.
Yeah. The only thing I would say about him is the thing that I really liked about him is that he is a truly flawed character.
Yeah,
And even though that sounds like a bad thing, like it means that he's like a very real character. Like he makes very real mistakes that, you know, a 15, 16-year-old kid would probably make.
yeah,
And that's just one thing I love about that book and I love about that character.
absolutely.
The other thing I thought of recently is he kind of um, he kind of hides out in the open and he keeps himself disguised by his own he like perpetuates his own legend and blows himself up to be like way more than what he is. I mean, he is
Yeah,
like this he does kind of become like this great hero or whatever, but he blows himself up to be like this crazy thing. And then like I don't think it's a spoiler to say that now he's an innkeeper, and after all the events of the book take place, you know, the whole time during those books, you know, he's an innkeeper, he's telling his story, um, and along the way he tells somebody in the inn that comes to visit him, he's like, I'm Kvothe, and like I'll tell you my story if you want to sit down and like listen to the rest of the story. And they laugh at him
yeah, I remember
because
that.
he's so like Quoth is like this huge thing, like the Tamerlane the Great they always talk about. And so he's like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. So, you know, we don't exactly know yet, but if his goal is to disguise himself from the Chandrian and to kind of stay under the radar, then he's doing a really good job of that by just perpetuating his own legend so that nobody suspects this lowly innkeeper.
Yep.
That was just something I was thinking about recently.
No, for sure. And that's and yeah, that's absolutely the truth. The the bigger he blows it up, the story's up for people, you know, the less that, oh, there's no way you're the guy that's got, you know, the cloak of shadows or cloak of no particular color or whatever it is, and this, that, and the
Right.
other.
Yeah, the only other thing that I really liked about what that I was thinking about recently too is I I think I'm a big fan of unreliable narrators. Um, like reading Mistborn, there's not, and this isn't like a good or bad thing, it's just a storytelling device. Like with a book like Mistborn, it's told in a third person point of view, and there's no real room for discrepancy. Like
Yeah,
whatever is on the page is like what's happening. But when you get a book like the Dresden Files or Kingkiller Chronicles, you kind of get this unreliable narrator, and not all books that are told in first person point of view are unreliable narrators. Sometimes you get a first person point of view and it is a reliable narrator. But for Kingkiller specifically, we can see throughout the text that he is an unreliable narrator and that things aren't always exactly what he says they are. Like
yeah,
Quoth has the ability to lie in his own story, and so it leaves a lot of room for other people's perception. And like, you know, a lot of people probably view Quoth a lot differently than he views himself. And so it's kind of cool to get that bias. Like it leaves it open for like another point of view, like short story or something that we might be able to see, like how we see with Dresden Files all the time.
yep. Yeah, that would be really cool if they did that. If
Yeah,
he did that, it'd be
I
sweet.
yeah, I would love more Kingkiller short stories, or even if we got like a spin-off series in that
Yeah,
same world. Um, all right, well, let's go on to Rezkin. We'll do a little bit of a sneak peek view into our one of our upcoming episodes where we do King's Dark Tidings by
yes.
Kade. So Rezkin is the main character of King's Dark Tidings. He is kind of a rogue assassin character. He's more like a warrior, but he's very rogue-like. Um, and he is someone who's trained his entire life in a fortress, and he all he knows is like combat, and he gets taught like a whole bunch of other things, such as interacting with the nobility and merchant, like how to be a merchant, along with tons of other stuff. Like he can basically impersonate anybody. He's the perfect spy, and he's the perfect assassin. He's trained in all manner of combat, but what that training does not prepare him for is all this other stuff that comes with living a normal life. And so
Yeah.
once some events happen where he leaves the fortress and he goes on to pursue the rest of his life, and he's not really sure what that is. He's not sure like what he's supposed to go and do, because he's just been trained for this one thing his whole life. And he gets out into the world and he has all this skill, but the world, you can't necessarily use that skill for everything. And so he lives by a set of rules, his code. And rule number one is protect and honor your friends. So his first day in town, somebody walks up to him and they're talking at a bar or an inn, and they call him friend. And so he's like, oh, this must be one of my
Yeah.
friends. And it kind of leads to this whole story of misunderstanding. Like the whole entirety of King's Dark Tidings, the whole story across all 4 books that are out, is just like one big misunderstanding, because the
Yep.
first rule, very light spoilers. I'm pretty sure it gets mentioned in the first book. But the first rule is really to protect and honor your king. But he got told the rule wrongly. Somebody misspoke at the beginning of the book. And so he's kind of going on this quest to protect and honor his friends, when he, in reality, was raised for a completely different purpose. And it's just really fun to see where that takes him. And it takes him on this huge lifelong quest across all these different continents to protect and honor his friends.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's the crazy part to me, is that the entire series stemmed from his trainer messing up that word.
right.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's pretty wild.
Yeah, everything he does is based off that first rule. And there's
Yep.
there's like 300 rules or something, 3 or 400 rules.
Yeah.
And that's just the number one. And the first rule is supposed to supersede all the other rules. And the other rules are like, stay hidden when possible, retreat when possible, stuff that has to do with assassination.
Yep.
Um, Other than that, the other thing I really like about his character, and we've talked about this multiple times, is uh, he's extremely skilled. So he's not just like the best warrior around. He is like the very best warrior that there
Yeah.
ever was. Like he is like God status. And a lot of people, I feel like some people would read this book and think that he's a little bit of a Mary Sue, which just means like a character where nothing really bad ever happens to them. They're able to get out of every single
Yeah.
situation, and they kind of have like plot armor where nothing can really hurt them because of the plot. And Rezkin, there's an argument there for sure, but there's so many other situations that he cannot simply get out of by combat. Like there's so many social situations and politics that he has to figure out, that he can't simply like use his swords for.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. And in that way, he's at a big disadvantage because he's never had any social skills. He just grew up in this fortress and
Yep.
learned how to kill people. So it's really interesting watching him navigate certain situations, and he's super smart, so he always kind of figures it out, but it's his mind his mind just works very differently than the other people around him, and nobody really quite understands him. And so in a way he's a very like lonely person because he's the only one of his kind. And
Yeah.
the other thing that is really interesting about him is there's this quote that I really like. It's at the beginning of the first book. And I think it's when he's walking into town for the first time or when he's leaving the fortress and he's trying to figure out what role he should play as he goes into this new world. He's thinking like, should I be a merchant? Should I be a mercenary? Should I be like a soldier or like a tradesman or all these different things? And he's kind of thinking about all the different roles he can play, and he kind of gets to this point in his thought process where he's like, all of these things are just masks that I put on. Like I can become anybody, but if I'm not wearing a mask, who am I?
Yeah.
And so I really really like that. I really like latched onto this last reread, and I was kind of like, who is Rezkin as a
Mm.
person? And I think there's an argument to say that he isn't one. You know what I mean? Like he's not
Yeah.
really like he is just he has been trained to become anybody, and he's never had a like suspended length of time to figure out who he is as a person. Especially imagine like at such a young age, um you get so much of your personality from ages like what, 10
Two,
to
yeah,
18.
I was gonna say, yeah, exactly.
I mean, like your real personality, like who you're gonna become and like the
Yep.
kind of person you're gonna be, I feel is kind of like between the ages of like 10 and 20, maybe.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and he never like got that chance during that age. He was learning to be a ghost, basically. And so it's kind of this interesting thing, and it leads to a lot of misunderstandings, and it leads to a lot of people with like hurt feelings and stuff because they think they know Rezkin,
Yep.
but he really is a ghost. Like he really is like no one in particular. He is all these different faces and no one at the same time. And so it really tends to hurt the people around him when they think they really know him and they don't. He turns out to be either somebody completely different or just somebody that they didn't know at all. Um,
He's like this just popped into my head. He's like imagine like he's a computer. Obviously all the rules, like maybe the algorithm. So everything, all the inputs and like everything that happens to him that he sees, that he does, all gets filtered throughout those rules. And
yeah,
so anything that might escape those rules and the rules like kind of gray area, he's gonna have no clue how to do. And
right.
again, that's what you're just talking about, how he gets confused. But I just thought of that
Yeah,
example, I
exactly.
guess.
It comes up a couple times in the books where um I think there's a couple times where he's like, is there a rule that applies to this? And he's kind of thinking through his
Yeah.
head and like sees that there's not. And so then he kind of regards the situation as irrelevant.
Mm.
Like his sense of propriety, is that the word?
I
Like
yeah.
not being naked in front of people and
Yeah,
stuff
that's
like that. Like
propriety. Yep.
like he has no concept of that because it doesn't fit
Yeah.
into the rules at all.
Yep. Yep.
There's nothing in the rules about having propriety. And so it's situations like that where if something does not fit into this list that he has inside his head, it's completely like irrelevant to him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other thing I was going to say, another quote that I thought was, or not necessarily a quote, but a situation that happened later on in the books. And I don't feel like it's really a spoiler or anything, but Wesson says, you know, some of Rezkin's friends are like upset at him after they find out some stuff. And they ask Wesson, like, aren't you upset with him? Like, how can you be okay with this? And he's like, well, I never presumed to know who Rezkin was. Like, I
Yeah, yeah,
never, like, you guys all assumed that he was this person, but this whole time I just met him on the road. Like, I never assumed to know who he was. Like, I didn't know anything about him, so this really doesn't like affect my view of him at all. It's just new
yeah,
information that's coming in. um and I thought it was really interesting that Kelcade put a character in there like that, because we get so many other characters that are reacting like violently to whether good or bad, to everything that Rezkin does or doesn't do. And you kind of see that through the first like few books. And then it comes to Wesson and he's like, yeah, I don't really know him. I never pretended to know him. So
yeah,
I'm not as upset as you guys. And I think Jimson is kind of that way too. He's like, you know, he kind of just watches what Rezkin does. And there's a couple times that he calls him out on stuff, but I think Jimson also understands. He's like, I don't think I really know this guy. I don't think anybody does. And he just kind of watches as Rezkin like manipulates the people around him. And
yep.
it's really interesting whenever we get to pop into Jimson's head and see what he thinks of Rezkin.
I agree.
Um, all right, let's talk about Marcone from the Dresden Files.
Marcone, John Marconi.
uh, Marcone is the Lord of the Underworld, which means they call him the robber baron of Chicago. And basically he is like the ruling Italian mob boss. Um, and he's not maybe he does fit into some stereotypes, but I feel like he's not the typical like Godfather kind of mob boss.
I think in some ways he is, but in more of the ways that like when you hear like Godfather, you would think he does things differently.
Right. I feel like he is much more of a corporate entity,
Yeah,
and he has like, we don't know exactly what they are, but he has like some sort of set of rules that he governs by. And so his criminal empire is incredibly like tidy and organized. He tries to
yep,
avoid killing innocents, women, and children, I
yep,
believe.
that's correct.
Um, I think human trafficking and stuff. He's not cool with
Yep,
that.
yep.
I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he doesn't do drug trafficking, or maybe
Nope.
he does. I can't remember.
I
But
don't I feel like maybe he doesn't. I don't know if he
yeah,
stops people, but I don't know if it's maybe his main form of business. Although I could be wrong.
right. Yeah, my gut tells me that he doesn't do drug trafficking, but everything else revolving around the mob he'll do. Like, I think he
Yeah,
does like extortion and
yeah.
you know, like
All sorts of shady scams and schemes.
shady business dealings and stuff. This is easily one of my favorite like frenemy relationships that's ever been written with him
Mm,
and Dresden.
yep.
Um, I think, you know, some people might read these books and be like, oh, like I hate Marcone in the way that you're supposed to hate him. Like you hate him as like a bad guy, not in the way that he's written, but like
Yeah,
you hate his character. I don't.
yeah.
I genuinely like Marcone as a person. Um, and I don't know, he's just so interesting. He kind of starts off as like this shady mob boss that Dresden comes into contact every now and then. Um, and you don't really know too much about him other than he is that, and that Harry like hates him right off the bat.
Yep.
Like Harry like by far just hates this guy and wants to kill him on so many occasions. But, and we'll go into spoilers now. He has, I put here, he's got a stone cold heart with a little bit of gold at the center.
That's a perfect description.
He, you know, we find him, he's trying to take he ends up grabbing the Shroud of Turin. When I think he had a thief steal it for him, and then Nicodemus and his guys tried to take it, and then Marcone stood up to them with Dresden and took it back, right?
Yeah.
And like they were on that train, and
Yep.
they're like running on the top of the train, and Marcone
Yeah,
like grabs
it
the
was
shroud,
nuts.
and I think he either jumps over to a helicopter or jumps into the water.
I think he jumps in the water. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yep.
And it was such a satisfying moment later on in that book when Harry like follows him for days on the highway. Like he's following him across all these states. And then he finally gets to a hospital, and Marcone has this little girl in a hospital bed, and he's like wrapping the shroud around her, and he's like sitting there and like reading to her. And I was just like, oh my God, like really, not in a bad way, like, oh man, like that really hits
Yeah, no,
hard.
absolutely.
And then Harry asks him what he's doing, and we find out later in White Knight that it's Helen Beckett's daughter.
Yeah.
And that he didn't shoot Helen Beckett's daughter, but he was at the park and people were shooting at him. And Helen and her former husband were like behind him with their daughter at the park. The bullets missed Marcone and hit the daughter. And my God, that was one of the most, I think I tear up every single time he does that soul gaze.
Yeah.
Every time in White Knight when it does that soul gaze scene, and you see the kid go down, and James Marsters does such a good job of like making the kid sound like she's really in pain and like freaking out.
Yeah,
And
it's pretty intense.
yeah, it's super intense, and it paints such a vivid picture, and you really get to see why Marcone cares about women and children. And you know, he still becomes like this criminal overlord, but he's got this little part of him that he always carries with him. And I really like that part of his character. And every time him and Harry are together, they always have like really fun, like kind of back and forth quippy conversation. And then like every time they team up, like my heart just like warms up. I'm like, yes, they're working together.
Yep.
Like when I read it for the first time, I was so surprised in I think it was White Knight when Harry is at the Wraith Deeps, and they open the portal, and then Marcone comes in with his guys to like save the day and back Harry up.
Yep.
And like I just felt that's always so satisfying. Like I always get so happy when that happens. I'm like, yes, they're there, they're coming.
Yeah, for sure. And even and him and Harry, just real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
I think their respect for, because I think
Yes,
Harry hates him, but the respect that they have for each other, I think is also an incredibly interesting. It's a very kind of like raw, and like, I understand that you're powerful. I understand that like you could hurt me, but let's set that aside, do what we need to do, stuff like that. I feel like I see that a lot. And there's one point where, what is his name? The Knight of the Blackened Denarius, the main guy's name.
Nicodemus.
Nicodemus he took him, right? Like Marcone was captive at one point, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And Harry went to save him. And I'm like, there's a lot of situations like, across different books where or either Hera will save him or save this. And so it's always interesting to know that like one guy might have a favor with the next guy, or like between Harry and Marcone.
Right.
So I think that's cool.
Matter of fact, I think it was Full Moon where I can't remember. I think I haven't read Full Moon in so long, but Marcone was up on a rope
Yeah.
and Harry somehow Harry saved him. Like he was like, I can't let this guy die. And like
Yeah.
I forget what the exact situation is, but somehow Harry like got him free of wherever he was, or at least got him to the point where he could cut himself loose. And then Marcone turned around and helped Harry when he was dealing with the wolves. If I'm remembering that correctly, I think I am.
Sounds familiar.
And yeah, so it's always, I always just love seeing them go back and forth. And then of course, Battlegrounds. Oh my God, that whole situation with Marcone was so good.
Yeah.
Where they're working together, and the whole book they're like in peace talks and Battlegrounds, like they're going back and forth like they're friends and like talking.
Yep.
And my heart literally warmed up when everything happens on the beach. We won't go into it, but everything that happens on the beach, and they're sitting in the sand and they're saying something back and forth, and then Harry doesn't say it out loud, but in the book he says, and I definitely didn't laugh with Marcone. And
Yeah.
Be friends.
Yeah, that is sweet. I agree.
Yeah, so Marcone's great. I love him. He's a great foil to Dresden, and I'm not looking forward to the day where Dresden has to kill him. It's going to have to come at some point, or maybe they'll work it out, and I really hope they do.
Yeah, I hope they work it out. That'd be sweet.
All right, spoilers over?
Yep.
Okay, let's move on. You know what? I was going to talk about Rowan Damisch from Scythe.
Yep.
But I have not read these books in a very long time.
Copy that. Yeah, it's been a while for me too. It's definitely not fresh.
I read the third book when it came out, but up until that, it had been at least a couple years since I had read the first two, I think.
Gotcha.
But Rowan is one of the two Scythes in the series Scythe. And one of the two like Reapers, I guess you could call them.
Yeah.
And him and this girl Citra are basically tasked with it's the future and nobody dies anymore. But in order to maintain like population control, they have to have, the government has to have these things called scythes that can kill people at will. And they have to like maintain a quota and stuff.
Yep.
And so Rowan is one of the scythes, and I feel like it's not too much of a spoiler to say he goes rogue. Like he doesn't really adhere to the rules the way the other scythes do. And he's kind of like he's almost kind of like a good Darth Vader, like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like he's definitely like the anti-hero of the story. And he definitely goes like really far with what he's willing to do. And you know, like I said, I haven't read this in a while. And I really don't have that much on him, but I really liked him. Any of you guys listening should check out the Scythe series. It's kind of a young adult series, but it's very good and very enjoyable. Like you won't be reading it and be like, oh, I feel like I'm reading like a book meant for teenagers.
I feel like I'm in high school again.
Yeah. All right, I have Aral Kingslayer on here, but I'm going to talk about that when we talk about the books I want to recommend to you.
Okay, copy that.
Vin, you want to talk about Vin?
I would love to talk about Vin. All right, so Mistborn series, the series that I am currently reading. I'm on almost done with book 2.
Jeez.
Vin is like this slave girl. They call him Ska, and they live in this huge, I guess, it's kind of an empire. Yeah, it is an empire.
The
And basically
final
these,
empire.
the final empire. And these Ska are just like, they're the lowest of the lows slaves. I mean, they're treated horribly. They're beat. They're used for their labor. They're killed. They're raped. Like, they're all these just terrible things. And so Vin is this girl that, I mean, almost the whole entire story is based about her. Here's one thing I forgot to mention. So there's like magic, I guess. It's called allomancy. It has to do with metals and eating metals, and you get these powers. And so Vin, without her realizing it, is actually an allomancer. So she's got these powers. She calls it her luck. And so she uses that frequently to like, maybe I won't get beat if I calm this guy down, this, that, and the other. And she's recognized. And so like through that recognition by somebody who is a trained, very famous, I guess, I think they call him a crew leader. Like I'm pretty sure that's his job for
Yeah.
most of the book. Recognizes her, and from there on, you get to see this just incredible like growth from Vin, coming from like, again, the lowest of the low slave to like somebody who's ultimately extremely powerful and a very potent allomancer. And it's just cool. She's got a really interesting arc. There's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of craziness, in my opinion, a lot of very intense moments to deal with that, and kind of her battle with figuring out who she is, what she wants to do, who she loves, learning to love herself. Yeah, she's an awesome character.
Yeah, I'm really liking Vin. I like I mentioned, I kind of saw Kelsier as the main character, but now I'm kind of realizing that he is the Durzo to Kylar Stern.
Yeah, yep.
And I'm liking Vin a lot more. She's had a pretty interesting character arc, like you mentioned, where at first she's like very stubborn and not trusting or anything. And Kelsier kind of teaches her that you can let people in and that you don't
Yeah,
have to be scared all the time. And when she first joined up with him, she was really worried about like getting beaten by him and stuff. She's like, I know he's gonna hit me soon. Like, when is he gonna hit me?
yeah,
And then he never does. And she even asks him, there's one point in the first book where she asks him, are you gonna hit me now, or like what? And he's like, what? No, I'm not gonna hit you.
yeah,
And it was kind of this really cool moment where she realized like, oh, and it took a long time. I think it was like 3/4 of the way through the first book, where she was like super distrusting of Kelsier, and she just like didn't believe anything he said. And there was such a poignant moment for me about 3/4 of the way through. Somebody says something like Kelsier is a good man, and it kind of went into her thoughts, and she's like, oh, Kelsier is a good man. And it was like the first time that she was like admitting that to herself, and admitting it was for me, it was kind of like this big moment because it was like the first time that she's recognized that anybody is a good person.
yeah, yep,
Like, up until that moment, like everybody, like everyone will hurt you, and like
yeah,
everyone will beat you
exactly.
if they're your master. And so her having this moment saying that, oh, like Kelsier is a good man, was kind of like this huge moment that was really like, I liked the way he set it up because it was like really underplayed. Like, it was just like one line in this whole, like, I'm sure, page of text. Like it probably would have been like looked over, but it was such an interesting character moment because up until that point, she hadn't said or thought anything like that. And so I don't know. I really liked that moment with her character.
Yep, I would totally agree. Definitely a big moment. It's kind of a pivot point for the rest of the, the rest of the book. I would assume series. I know you said something about maybe the other books are like written in a different era, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. Let's see. What else do I got on her? She actually reminds me of Kylar Stern in a lot of ways, where like she doesn't quite have the cleverness or like Kelsier had like this big game plan, and he always
Yeah,
had like even when he was flying by the seat of his pants, he always kind of had something up his sleeve. And Vin doesn't have that at all. I mean, up until the point that I'm at, I haven't seen her like put a big plan together or
yeah,
anything. But what she lacks in that, she makes up for in just like willingness to do things.
yeah.
Like she's like, even if I don't have a plan, I gotta go right now and do this thing. And like
Yep.
just
And no matter what, I can't lose. I have to win.
right.
Yep.
So yeah, that's really cool. Let's see.
I can say being a little bit, well, probably quite a bit, I don't know how much further, but I am than you, that I can say that I have seen lately moments where she like will pull out like a trump card, right? And just outthink, outmaneuver, and
Yeah,
like beat these people, which is also really cool to see. Cause back then in the first book, just like you said, she's kind of very, uh, like you said with Kyler, kind of bumbles along.
yeah. Yeah, I'm interested to see where her character goes. So far, the second book, I'm not as hot on as the first book. Like, so far, I'm kind of like, all right, like, let's get through this until we can figure out what's going on. But I
It
really want
gets
to,
good, man.
yeah, I believe it.
Yep. Yep.
I really want to see where it goes, and I'm waiting for the big character arc to see where all these characters end up.
Absolutely.
All right, is that about it for Vin?
Yep. I think we're good.
Okay. I want to talk about Viridiana Sovari from the Night
Yeah.
Angel trilogy. Oh man, this is first of all my favorite character in the Night Angel trilogy, more so than Kylar or Durzo. And I think I'm pretty sure that this is like my favorite character arc that I've ever read.
Wow.
Um, she so her name's is it Vi or V, her short name?
Bye.
Vi.
Bye. Yep.
Um, so Vi is pretty much the same age as Kylar, and she grows up in a similar way, gets taken under another assassin's wing, but the other assassin that she trains with is like super abusive. Like he rapes her and hits her and all this other stuff. He trains her to using Mama K. He trains her to use her body in order to get close to her targets so that she can kill them,
Mm.
and she's very good at it. Throughout the first, I don't know, a couple books, throughout the first two books, she is like super guarded and
Yeah.
super cold towards everybody, and like has no feelings whatsoever about killing anybody. Like it's just like a job, and she hates Kylar, and she's tasked with killing him at one point. And so they kind of have like this ongoing back and forth through the second book. Trying to think, we should probably go into spoilers here, so if you haven't read Night Angel trilogy, maybe mute this for a minute. It won't be too bad of spoilers, but or actually maybe it will. So spoiler warning, she goes on through the second book, and how does she first get involved with it? She kidnaps Yuli,
Yep.
Kylar's pseudo daughter.
Yep.
And through that, she ends up, I'm trying to remember the exact turn of events.
So she kidnaps Julie, right? And then the woman from the chantry finds them, and
Right.
and then of course they end up at the chantry. I don't know if that's where you were going, but that's what I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. So basically, like as it pertains to her character growth, though, I'm thinking like she kills Jarl, and that's before she kidnaps Yuli, I think.
And that was a big
And
moment.
yeah, that was like the first moment where she's like, she's got the arrow drawn and she's supposed to kill Kylar, but Jarl's there, and he's got a contract out against him too, and we don't realize it, but Vi has a compulsion,
Yeah.
like making her do these things, like a magical compulsion. And so she's got this arrow drawn and she's just like crying, and she like doesn't want to kill him, but the magic is forcing her body to. And Jarl is like her best friend. He's the one who like protected her when she was learning how to like use her body, like learning how to basically how to be like a courtesan from Mama Kade. And he was the one who would always like listen to her and just kind of be friends with her. So it's like this huge moment where she has to kill this person that she loved like a brother. And as the books go on, she kind of starts to like fall in love with Kylar. And it gets to this point for me every time when I'm reading the books, like I'm just like, like I just want to like scream at Kylar
Yeah.
because she's like starting to fall in love with him and he doesn't realize it. And he's of course in love with Aline.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, just get over to Vi, like just go that way. And by the end of the third book, heavy spoilers, Aline dies and he ends up with Vi. And that last moment with Vi and Kylar together is just like my favorite thing. Like there's no overt, there's no the author didn't like just tell us straight up and then they got together and like lived together happily ever after. But it's just like this scene where they're standing on the cliff and they're looking out and all the flowers are blooming from what Aline did. And then Vi just reaches down and like grabs his hand. And I'm like, fuck yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just like, I love it so much. And she's such a cool character. Spoilers over. Beyond that, she's very clever. I think she's more clever than Kylar. I think she plans things out a little bit better and knows what she's doing. She knows how to use what she's got to get information and to kill people.
Very manipulative.
Very manipulative, very good at it.
Yep.
And of course her dialogue is just some of the funniest dialogue. I think just because she's so like deadpan and cold. I don't know, it just makes her like very funny. I don't remember exactly what she said, but do you remember the scene where in the second book she comes to the town that Kylar's in and she's in the alley and the current what's the name of the, not Sanhedrin, what's the big guild that's against
I know
every,
what you're talking about. The like
you know
yes, what
what
the
I'm
heck?
talking about?
I know
Well,
exactly, but I want to remember.
the guild, the thugs are in the alleyway,
Yeah.
and they're like trying to they're like trying to like take her with them, like, oh, we're gonna take you to like meet the guild master, and you know he's gonna want to meet you, and like this guy is getting all handsy with her, and like it's something about her character, she's like really particular about her hair,
Yes.
and
Okay.
he's touching her all over the place, he's like grabbing her boobs and stuff and her ass, and she's like completely deadpan, like she's completely removed from her body, and she's telling him like, I will kill you, I need to know where Kylar is, and meanwhile this guy is like doing all these things, and finally like he reaches up and like tugs on her hair, and she flips
Yeah. She
out, and
snaps.
like in all caps it's like, did you just touch my hair, and
Yeah.
like pulls out her swords and kills everybody within
Yep.
seconds, like everybody in the
Yep.
entire alley, she like kills them all. And I think the scene kind of goes away, and then it comes back to her, and she's just like sitting on the stairs covered in blood, just like holding on to her hair, and
Yep.
she's just like tripping out. um and so she has very like very dark but very funny moments, I feel like.
Yep. I would totally agree.
um all right, I think that's all I want to say about Vi. What about, did you have anything for Sassid?
Uh, y- yes, I would probably like to talk about Sasson.
Okay.
So like so Sasson is a part of a sect. They call him keepers, right? And he's a keeper of knowledge. He's got all these interesting like powers that can help him like remember information, and he can be super strong, but first he has to make himself super weak. So like there's kind of this give and take, but I'm not gonna go crazy with Sazed, but he's like the ultimate voice of wisdom throughout the whole book. He's like this like in so many different situations you see like like Vin or Eldon or all these people like will like ask him. Like I was just at a part where like both Vin and it's Eldon, right? That's the guy's name, or is L
Ellen.
something? Ellen, okay.
Ellen, yeah.
And they both like come on separate occasions to like ask him about this. I'm not gonna say anything about it, but
Yeah.
uh and he's just so wise and he's got so much information. He's also trying to figure out the mystery of the book, right? And so that's like one of his goals is like trying to figure out why these things are happening, what's going on, and listening to him like do this research and find this stuff is just so cool. He might be my favorite character in that book.
Oh, really? I was not
Yeah.
expecting that.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I have not paid him much attention.
Yeah.
He's kind of been a background character for me, and nothing is really springing up when I think of him. But
Yeah.
I do like, the thing that I do like about him is how he is with Vin,
Yeah.
and just how he's like a friend to her, and
Yep. Always treats her really well.
yeah, and now that some people in her life are gone, he can kind of be this friend, like Ellen is too. Ellen is like a constant presence in her life,
Yep.
but Sazed is like basically her best friend. Like he's
Yeah. Yeah.
basically like the person that she goes to
Yep.
with all her stuff. And so it's really cool to see their interactions, without going into too much detail. Sazed's interactions with Marsh are really
Yeah.
interesting
Yes.
in the
Yes.
second book.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Um, all right. Is that all we got on Sazed?
Yeah, that's plenty.
Should we talk about Harry motherfucking Blackstone Copperfield Dresden? I
There's
saved
no way that we could
I
do it without.
I saved the best for last.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Harry is easily my favorite character in fantasy.
Hands
Uh
down.
he is Dresden Files. We've talked about it before, but Dresden Files is like my go-to series.
Yep.
King's Dark Tidings, I always say, is kind of like the like my infatuation. Like I am infatuated with King's Dark Tidings,
Yeah.
and I love it to an insane degree. But the Dresden Files just feels like home. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always go back to Dresden Files when I need something to read. And Harry Dresden is just like, it sounds weird when I say it, but he's probably the character that I like look up to the most.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so I guess before I go into too much, do you have anything you want to say, your initial thoughts on Harry?
I think, Spencer, I think that, I mean, other than like, again, this is urban fantasy, right? So this is like
Yeah.
new it, in the real life. And so I think that something that I loved about, and it's maybe not just Harry, but this entire series is that fact itself. Like here is a wizard living in Chicago, has a day-to-day life, right? Has these things going on, but at the same time, like there's this entire other world that he's forced a lot of the time to interact with. And so
Yeah.
just his way of doing things and his kind of like comical shorthandedness is like just incredible. Like the way that he I was thinking about, oh, now I'm not gonna be able to remember, but there was a scene that I was thinking about just a little while ago. Oh, I'll have to come back if I remember it. But yeah, I think you'll nail it, dude.
Okay. Um, yeah, so Harry for me is he is like a genuinely good person. Like he's not I don't even know, I don't think I would really call him an anti-hero, although you could make the argument for it. He's he genuinely wants to protect people. He believes that protecting Chicago is his duty,
Yeah,
and he will put himself in harm's way time after time to save not only his close friends, but just the random strangers in Chicago. Like he
yeah,
sees it as his city and his duty to protect these people from what goes bump in the night. He doesn't have, he doesn't really have a code per se, but he has a very good like moral compass, and his conscience really guides him. Um, he he kind of bumbles in the way of like he's always got things pretty planned out, but the thing that he screws up more often than not is uh, he believes that in a way lying to his friends is what's going to protect them the most,
mm, yeah,
and often it puts his friends in more danger, which makes his job harder.
yeah,
um, and so throughout all these books he's still learning how to include his friends in his plans so that they don't get hurt and they don't come into harm's way. But he has everything he does, whether it ends up good or bad, comes from an honest, innocent place. Like it comes from like it comes from a very pure place of him wanting to do good. He
mm,
doesn't he doesn't lie to people or manipulate people in order to like get something. He cares very little for like material goods,
yeah,
or any like reputation or any sort of gain. Like he doesn't care about any of that. He just cares about like protecting the people that he loves and protecting the city. And you see this a lot when it comes to his apprentice Molly, and I think that is the best one of the best like character relationships in that series.
mm,
um and God, there's so many things I want to say about him. He's
Yeah.
so wise. He's always saying multiple times per book. I think when we do the reread for this podcast, like I'm going to be writing down so many of his quotes
Yeah.
because in every single book he says something that not only applies in the book and in the universe that he's in, but it applies like in my life. And
Yeah.
there's been many times where he's said something and I'm like, oh man, like I need to do that, or like
Yeah.
I need to like apply this to my life. I have it written down on my whiteboard. I forget the exact quote, but it's something like, um, if you if you're always looking backwards, you will forever run in circles. So look ahead to the future,
Yeah.
and I'm like, man, that is so, it's stuff like that all the time. And I'm just like, man, like Jim Butcher, like obviously all of this comes from Jim Butcher. And so it's like, man, this author is so smart and he's
Yeah.
so like incredibly wise. Like I would love to grab a beer with Butcher or something
Yeah.
and just like hang out and talk about life, because everything he says through Harry, I'm just like, man, like that is something that's like legitimately something that I want to like model myself
Yeah.
after. Um, and what does he say to Molly? There's a point where Molly is worried about becoming a monster. I think it's in White Knight, and she's like she's like crying and she's like, am I a monster? Am I becoming a monster? Because she's like, I wanted to like kill this person. Like
Yeah.
I was so angry that I wanted to use my magic to destroy them. And he says something like, Molly, monsters, people who aren't monsters think about doing these things. People who are monsters do them.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, I don't know. He's just got so many like cool little things like that he says that just kind of make me want to like emulate him more and more.
Yeah.
Um, even besides that, he truly believes in his use of magic, and he kind of, like I said, he doesn't really have like a code that he lives by. But as far as his magic goes, like he believes that magic is like a piece of creation and it's not meant for destruction. And he understands that there are times where you have to use it to protect yourself, but there are certain magics that he looks at and he's like, that is like a black spot on the history of magic. Like
Yeah.
nobody should be using like dark magic or anything. Like it is genuinely ugly, and it is not a system of creation. That is a system of death.
Yeah.
And he just like truly believes that his magic is a power for good. And not only that, but he loves magic for magic's sake,
Yeah.
and
The art of it.
not for like the power it gives him. Like he doesn't care about power. He he takes power because he needs it to protect his people. But I think if it were up to him, he would live as a hermit somewhere and just practice magic because he
Yeah. Different
loves
spells and different
magic.
like potions and everything.
Yeah.
He even says that at some point where he's like, I, I, I'm pretty sure he does, but he's like, I enjoy sitting down in my lab and like studying and talking with Bob and like figuring out, learning
Yeah.
and creating. Yeah, it's creation a lot. I mean, it's all creation.
Um, yeah. I don't know. I love Harry Dresden. I've often thought, this is gonna sound super crazy, but if I ever have a son in the future, I've often thought about naming him Dresden. so that someday I can like hand him all these books and be like, this is the person that you are like named after.
Yeah.
And, you know, he doesn't always, the thing I like about that is Harry doesn't always, he's not perfect. He's a very flawed character, and he often does the wrong thing, but the text gives you enough insight into his motives and the way that he thinks about something, or the way that he thinks about everything, that I would be comfortable with my future son trying to emulate him.
Yeah.
And like, what an incredible way to like give him like all these books and be like, this is the person that, you know, I'd like you to read these and just kind of like see who this person is that I named you
Yeah.
after. I always thought that'd be kind of cool.
Yep.
Um, let's see. He's very clever. He's always got a really cool plan that gets revealed at the end, that we're not necessarily privy to. Um, you know, like all of a sudden we'll find out that somebody who is on the opposing team has actually been working for Harry this whole time,
Yeah. Yep.
and it gets revealed later on. And there's always really interesting ways of finding those things out. Always got an ace up his sleeve.
Yep.
It's really fun to see how he gets out of every situation, even when he's put with his back to the wall. He's always got something, even if it's not planned out. There's always some way that he's able to make it out on top. And in that way, he kind of does have plot armor. Like we know that he's not going to die anytime soon, because we know for sure that there's like 6 or 7 more books or whatever, probably
Yeah.
more than that, probably 8 more books. Um, and so he does have a little bit of plot armor, so you always know he's going to make it out, but everyone else in the series is fair game. So
Yeah.
you never know who's going to die, and it always affects Harry
Yep.
in different ways. And it leads to a lot of problems with him. Even though Harry can't die, things around him can get worse and worse and worse until it totally just like degrades him as a person.
Yeah.
Um, and we've seen that happen a couple
Yep.
times, and how he pulls himself out of it. Anything else you want to say about Dresden?
I probably think not. It's weird being able to move on from him because we could sit and talk about him for a long time.
Yeah.
But for time's sake, I think we nailed it.
All right. All right. So let's go into the part of this episode where I want to pitch a couple books to you. And I actually forgot to download the pictures for the covers. I was gonna bring them up as I went through this. But I kind of organized them in order of what I think the likelihood is for you to read them.
Oh yeah. Nice.
So the first one is the Fallen Blade series. And
I'm pretty sure I've attempted this series before.
so you have.
Okay.
And you tried listening to there is one audiobook that they have for this, and it's not very good. Actually, I don't know, because it is the same guy that does the Brent Weeks Night Angel trilogy that does the audiobooks for these.
Yeah.
However, it is kind of the next step up in complexity from what we've been reading.
Yeah.
It's kind of like until you really get into it, it is kind of like the beginning of Mistborn, where there's a few different things going on and you're just kind of dropped into it and you're trying to figure it all out. And the pace that it's set at is very long form. So it's not like it's not like King's Dark Tidings or Dresden Files where things are just happening every
Yeah.
excuse me, every 5 seconds. It's more like you'll spend like quite a bit of time in one area while he like figures things out. But let's talk about the main protagonist of this series. So let's go up here to Aral Kingslayer and Triss. So Aral is actually a alcoholic and former opiate addict. I wish I could remember. They don't call it opium. It's something else.
Oh yeah, they're like the little beans or whatever that he chews
Yeah,
on, or the yeah.
they're like these little beans that he chews on or can make into a tea, and it has the same effect as opiates.
Yeah.
He was once the #1 assassin for his goddess. I don't know if you got that far to read about that in the book.
Pretty sure I did. I think I got, and again, remembering it might be difficult, but I definitely remember putting, I don't know, maybe 6 hours into it, 5 hours.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, so his goddess is Namara, and she basically had this cult of assassins, and they lived out on this island, and she would inhabit this statue that was in the middle of the island, and they would come to her and she would tell them like, hey, this is who I want you to kill. And so they would get their orders from her, and then they would go kill this person. And Namara was a goddess, so she was always she was the goddess of justice, and so she was absolutely like perfect in her decision for people to die. So the people that worked for this cult were not just assassins that get paid to kill somebody for money. They
Yeah.
were like assassins for justice, and whoever she told them to kill, they knew like there was a good reason for that person
Yeah,
to
that they
die.
needed to be gone.
And so then there's like this fall of the temple. I think it gets explained in the first chapter or two. There's like the temple falls and gets raided by the I think it's the army of Shan, and it's there's several gods in this world. There's like 6 or 7, and Shan is one of them, and he's the sun god, and he like raided their temple and killed seemingly all of the other assassins while Aral was out on a mission. And when he came back, he found everybody dead and gave up his life as a assassin of Namara, because it kind of gets explained later, but the people from the army of Shan killed Namara. They killed the goddess. And so so he kind of goes on, and he's like this alcoholic kind of derelict, living out of like a hotel room in a tavern.
Yep.
And he calls himself a shadow jack. There's I think if I remember correctly, and I'm not confusing the names, there's a blackjack and a shadow jack, and a blackjack will kill anyone for money. A shadow jack will do other illegal things for money. So he's basically a thief. And so he'll get paid for like high contract thieving operations. And that's kind of where his story starts in the first book. Is he gets contracts to either protect people or to steal goods for people, or many other like money laundering, or getting drugs and other illegal things over the border, like through a boat and stuff. So he gets paid to do all these sketchy stuff. So his story from there just kind of goes from contract to contract. The first couple books are just like kind of like the Dresden Files, just like these contracts that he takes, and him going on this big adventure throughout the whole book, fulfilling that contract. It leads into a much bigger overarching story, and the ending to this series is so satisfying. like the way it ends is just like, oh, like that is the way it is meant to end for the
Haha.
series. And I'm just like, I don't think he ever will, but I really hope he doesn't ever do more books in this series because the way he wrapped it up was so perfect.
Hmm.
And it's just a really good series. I think there's 6 books. Um, so Aral himself is incredibly clever and cunning. He always has a backup plan, and his planning for each mission is very, very cool. So he for each mission, and he explains it all in the book, like he lays it all out. He's got like this huge plan for every mission and plans every single step. And so it's something that in the books we've read, even though we have seen like assassins and thieves make these plans and kind of follow them through, like this is a completely different level. Like we see him map out everything, and then the camera kind of follows him through the mission. And so you see how he plans it, and then you see
Yeah.
how he carries it out. You see some curveballs that are thrown his way. And it's just really interesting. Those are my favorite parts of the book, where he's like on a mission and he's planning it out, and he's got to make all these things happen at the right time. Like he'll talk about guard patrols and like how he has like some fraction of a second to make it through this window so that he's
Yeah.
not seen. All that stuff is really cool. He gets really in depth with it. Um, and then he's got this companion called Triss. You probably remember Triss. He's
Yep.
like
I
his
remember Trish.
shadow, and he can like shroud him. Like he can pull shadow, and he can like make wings and stuff for Aral and do all these really cool different things. Um, Later on in the series, you kind of see. At first, you think that Aral is like this really selfish guy, but you learn more and more about him and what he went through during the fall of the temple, and you get to know more of his character and realize like he's not like a sweetheart. Like he's not like, it's not all of a sudden like, oh, he's this guy with the heart of gold. Like he kind of is, but it's not like this amazing like character arc. It just kind of happens as he gains more and more friends, and kind of like Vin, he realizes that he can open himself up to people and that
Yeah.
that's okay. And so that's a really good character arc. Um, but all in all, I would really recommend the series. It's again, it's lengthy and it's kind of hard to get through. Just in the way that it's not action packed all the time. I
Yeah.
would say I would say that it's maybe one more step past Mistborn, where Mistborn is kind of like, especially in the second book, there's not action happening all the time either. A lot of it is like explaining what's going on in the situation.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what like the Fallen Blade series is, but it's really, really rewarding, and it's really, really worth it. Um, the thing that sucks is there's only one audiobook, and it's for the first book, and then after that there's no more audiobooks. They didn't do
Yeah.
any more after that. So you'd have to read it on paper.
I think I still have the copy you gave me of the first one because I know that you gave me a paper copy of it.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, you should definitely read it.
Yep. I will.
Okay, so the other one I want to pitch to you is not actually fantasy. I guess you could call it maybe sci-fi. It's set in like I think like the 70s or 80s, I want to say. It's a modern book written in the 2000s. I actually picked it up at an airport. I think on my way either to or from Ireland or something. And it so it's about time travel. That's the main thing. And the
Sweet.
thing that's so interesting about this book is it's not your typical like sci-fi time travel at all. It's a very, very unique look at time travel, where there's this guy, Simon Morley, and he works as an artist. And one day this guy approaches him and says, um, you know, you have been selected after careful consideration. We've selected you for this program that the government is doing. Can I talk to you about it further in private? And so he pulls him aside and tells him, you know, there's this program that we're doing, and I've seen it for myself, and it is the most amazing thing you've ever seen. He's like, if I were able to do it again, I would sell everything I have, give up everything I own to do it.
Wow.
He's like, so like, will you, he's like, you have to agree to the terms before we even show you what it is. And at that point, Simon has like nothing going on in his life, really.
Yeah.
He's like a bachelor who's living in like a studio apartment. He's kind of not down on his luck, but he's got like this low paying job. And he's like, all right, let's do it. And after consideration, he does. And so he takes him to this warehouse and shows him that time travel is real. And the way that you do it is, in the modern day, you have to go somewhere that has not been touched at all since the date that you're trying to get to. So if you're
Wow.
so if you're trying to get to like 1875, you have to find a building that has not had anyone in it since 1875.
What?
And
That's
so,
crazy.
yeah. And so he takes him, a whole bunch of events unfold, but eventually they go to this, there's like a mansion. And basically how this works is, I forget what time period they're trying to get to. It's it's like right before the Statue of Liberty was built, I think.
Hmm.
And so he goes into this mansion and he sits in this room that is not, the room itself has not been touched by anyone since whatever date.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a montage before this of him learning how to like meditate
Yeah.
and how to go into hypnosis. And so he sits at this table and he gets this thing ticking back and forth.
Metronome.
And yeah, and he like hypnotizes himself. And like hours go by or whatever, and he doesn't think that anything has worked. And so eventually he like stands up and goes to go out the door, and he's in like 1850 or whatever. Like he's been put back in time by, and the book explains it so much better. Like, you know how there's books that have like a really uh not complicated but really like detailed magic system.
Yeah.
That's the way this book is about time travel. Like there's a ton of rules to it. There's a ton of like reasons why Simon was the only one who could do it.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a certain way that you have to meditate. Like it explains like the thought process and all these little things that play into it to teleport yourself back in time. And it's not based in magic at all. It's basically like saying, they gave some scientific reason saying that when a place hasn't been touched at all since this date, there's like a link in the timeline from then to now that has been uninterrupted. And so you can travel between those points. And it's really, really interesting.
That
Like,
is sounds super interesting.
dude, I love this book. There's a second one. There's a second one that I got about halfway through, and then I think oh, excuse me. And then I stopped reading it. I can't remember why. I really liked it, but I just for whatever reason stopped reading it. And then the guy who writes this book, Jack Finney, he also has a ton of other books about time travel. This guy loves time travel, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's got he's got this book, what's it called? All of his titles have something to do with time.
Yep.
And this book, it's a book of short stories about time travel and
Whoa.
people time traveling in different ways and all these different like alternate realities where what if time travel was through your television and like you could time travel through your TV and like what if everybody had one
Yeah.
and it was just like our smartphones like people just time traveled regularly and it was
All
like
every day, all the time.
yeah, and it was like regulated and there was all these rules to it, but like everyone had a time travel machine in their house, like everybody does it. And then there's other ones of like time anomalies and like all these really cool things that happen. So if you like time travel, I would definitely read Time and Again by Jack Finney. And I would definitely also check out his short stories because they are a ton of fun. Everything, all of the stories I've read by him were super, super awesome.
Yep, I like the sounds of that. I do.
Yeah.
I think time traveling stories, and I watched a little short video on YouTube. It was like a not a fan made, but it was just like a content creator on YouTube. Uh, I think hired some people and made this short story. It's probably about 10, 12 minutes long, and it's about a time traveler who's getting interviewed by like the CIA or some special operations or whatever you want to say. And it was so good. In my head, I was like, they should have made it a movie. It was so good. I'll
Yeah.
have to find it. I can put a link. I'll give you a link to it. It's so good.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I love time travel stuff. I don't know if you've heard of the show Dark on Netflix.
I have heard of it, never seen it though.
Oh man, it is all about time travel, and there's 3 seasons, and it's really, really, really good. Like
Okay.
it's kind of hard to explain what it's about, but once you start watching it, it's
You'll get it
yeah,
for
it's
sure.
it's it's one of those shows that doesn't make a lot of sense until the end of the first season,
Yeah.
and then you kind of understand what's going on because you're watching like all these different timelines and
Yep.
trying to like figure out how they connect to each other.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the first season, you kind of get it down. So you have to put up with it for a while, but
That's cool though.
um all right, so let's talk about Dragon Seed for a second. We tried listening to the audiobook of this, but the voice actor was so terrible
Yeah.
that
I
we
think I
could
remember
not
that.
get through it. Um, it was so bad, and it really hurt because I was like I was so excited to read it again, and I was so excited to show it to you,
Yeah.
but the the narrator did such a bad job that it almost made it definitely made it seem like it was a bad book, like that
Mm.
it was just a bad book.
Yeah.
And like the narrator screwed it up so bad that it completely disregarded all of the author's work.
Yeah.
This is a very good book. It's very fun. Um, Basically, as I'm sure you remember, it's a book set in a certain time where dragons kind of rule everything, and they're kind of
Yeah.
like these dragon humanoid people,
Yep.
and the humans are basically their slaves. And the story is kind of about like this human uprising and them taking back their land and not necessarily killing all the dragons, but just reasserting themselves as at least equals. And it follows this main character who I don't know. I wouldn't even put him as like one of my favorite characters in fantasy, but he is so interesting.
Mm.
He's not a warrior at all. He's a scholar and he has all of these like ancient books and he believes like we need to preserve all these books from the past so that we can have them for the future. Like we have all this knowledge and he loves like libraries, and when a library has been burned down or something he like loses it.
Yeah.
um and I don't know. It's just a very good series. The action is very fun. The action is very descriptive and like paints a really vivid image.
Mm,
There's lots of really fun characters. There's like a master hunter, like he's got like a bow and he's very, very good with it. There's lots of magical items and upgrades. And my favorite part about the book is, I'm not going to say who it is, but there are two characters later on in the book that start to have this relationship. And it is not the like deepest relationship that's ever been written.
hmm
It's not like a overarching relationship where you see these people get together like little by little and start to fall in love. It
Yeah,
actually happens pretty fast, but it is so the way they like interact with each other when they're first getting together is so like true and innocent and written so well, like it's so real,
yeah,
and it's so like they're both like really nervous and it really comes out that way in the page. um and there's this one scene that is my favorite scene in the whole book, and it's when they finally are like, okay, like we're together now. And
mm,
it's like this whole scene of them like enjoying being together. And in the book, it is one of my favorite scenes that's ever been written.
yeah.
And like across all of fantasy, like
Wow.
this isn't like my favorite fantasy book, and these aren't my favorite characters, but this scene is like, it makes me smile every time I read it, and it's
That's
one of
sick.
my favorite scenes. And unfortunately, I listened to this entire audiobook, and when it got to that scene, I was like, oh, this is not making me feel the same way.
Yeah,
Like the person who did the narrating completely messed up this scene that is like my favorite scene.
yeah.
And I'm just like, how did
Now
he
it's
do
personal.
that? Yeah, now it's personal. Like, how did
Yeah,
he do that?
yeah.
And so that was really sad. So people, I would recommend, please read Dragon Seed by James Maxey. Do not listen to the audiobook. It does you no favors. Read it on paper. It is such a different experience reading it on paper, and it is so worth it. It's not super complicated. It's a really, really easy read.
Mm,
It's pretty short, if I remember correctly. There's lots of interesting characters, lots of really fun action, and lots of kind of cool philosophical stuff, like just really cool like ideals and stuff that they explore when it comes to relations between the dragons and humans. It's really,
mm.
really interesting. And and there's a big twist at the end that is like the biggest like WTF moment. Like I did not see that coming in a million years.
I love those.
And it's really, really good.
Yep, those are good moments.
It completely takes everything you think you know about the story and throws it out the window. It's really
Yep.
good. Um, okay. I will try to get through these last two because I'm pretty sure you're not going to read these at least for a while, but they are very, very good. There's a book called To Live Again by Robert Silverberg, and it's definitely sci-fi. It's set in the far future, and it's basically about like, what if you could take someone's mind and put it onto like a digital thing
Oh, like
that
transferring
can,
consciousness.
yes, exactly. But not only that, it can get uploaded into like my consciousness. So I can have my brain with my own thoughts, but I could also have this passenger who's riding with me and talking to me in my head and like giving me like their life advice.
Wow.
And so basically how people use it in this series is um, like business owners, like people who are like the head of corporations will like if another, like if a rival business owner has recently died, they will go buy his consciousness and put it onto their brain
Oh,
so
so they can
they,
learn everything that he knew and everything and all his tips and tricks.
right, so they can
Wow.
learn like all his tactics. And there's the book is really cool because there's not really action in the way that people are fighting. Like it does happen, but it's more like political maneuverings and
Espionage, stuff like that.
espionage, and like there's I think if I remember correctly, somebody was killed,
Mm,
and kind of throughout the story they're trying to figure out who killed this person.
yeah.
Um, but it gets interesting because nobody knows who somebody else has in their head. So it's all these maneuverings of like, it's so hard to explain, but pretty much everybody has somebody in their head. And everybody is trying to manipulate each other, but they don't know who the other person has in their head that is telling them like what to do or like advice, or like for example, if corporate guy A is trying to manipulate corporate guy B, but corporate guy A, his business partner just died. Corporate guy B bought his business partner, and this guy is trying to manipulate this guy, but this guy knows all his secrets. And so
Oh,
it's this
yeah.
constant
That's
like
crazy.
shifting, and it's so good. I was I was completely like glued to the pages the entire time I read it. You cannot get it on audiobook. You have to read it on paper. Um, and it's actually very hard to find. You probably have to order it on Amazon. It's not a very well-known book at all. Um, Speaking of unknown books, this is the one this is the one you're probably least likely to read. Um, I honestly don't even know how to describe it. It's called the Time Master Trilogy by Louise Cooper. Um, and it is a very interesting book. It is extremely abstract. So there's lots of times that you're reading it and you're like, what am I reading? And you have to like go back and
Yeah.
reread things.
Yep.
But basically, it's been years since I've read this. It's been like 7 years since I've read this. But it's about this kid named Tarid who grows up in this village in the outskirts of the world. And he leaves home one day for some reason. He discovers he has some sort of power, and he leaves to go to this city to live in this castle. And it's kind of his journey of discovering his powers and his kind of ascent to godhood.
Wow.
There's other people with similar powers, but they're all a little bit different. And like the main two forces are chaos and order. And basically, he comes to understand that he is a reincarnation of one of these gods, and he doesn't know if it's the god of chaos or the god of order.
Hmm.
And each chaos and order have like several gods that are
Yeah.
all, there's like 6 or 7 of
We're all
them.
like deities.
Yeah. And but he doesn't know like which one he belongs to. And it's kind of his quest of figuring out his place in the world, knowing this. And he ends up like living in this castle. um and there's kind of like this time dilation. I think it's called the Time Master Trilogy because he is able to not travel in time, but he's able to step outside of time. And
Wow.
so like he's able to go into like a pocket dimension
Yeah.
and do his stuff. And it's very weird, but I enjoyed it so much. and there's a couple romantic relationship arcs that happen, and I have been very I've been feeling myself being pulled back towards it lately, and so I really want to order these books on Amazon again.
Huh,
um there is an audiobook version, but I'm not sure that it's very good.
yeah.
I kind of listened to a sample, and I'll have to go back and see. I just feel like it wasn't doing the same thing that the actual text was doing for me. So yeah, it's I'll read it, and I'll give you a better explanation as to what exactly it is. But that's the thing, is even when I was reading it, I was like, I am
You
not
still didn't really
sure.
know what was going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
like it's so hard to explain because you know what's going on, and you know like the events that are taking place, but you're like, what am I reading? Like this is crazy. Like all of this stuff that is happening is so completely abstract. It doesn't explain the magic system at all. And
Huh.
so like you just kind of
Stuck.
know. Well, not really stuck, but like you know that there are these powers, and you know kind of what they can be used to do, but it doesn't like explain like a magic system at all. And so all these like weird things are happening, and you're like, I don't know if this is like an effect of the magic he's using, or if it's part of like his like godly deity part of him
Mm.
that's like doing this thing. So it gets very confusing, but I I don't know. I really liked it. It was a lot of fun to read. And it was I think I liked it mostly because it was very different than anything else I had read. It was
Yeah.
almost like it's it's a weird thing to explain, but it was almost alien. Like it was
Interesting.
almost like, I had read all these fantasy books that have like a beginning, a climax, and an end, and
Yep.
like an overarching thing. And this book, it literally feels like it's a book from another time or from another world. Like it's so weird, and like it gives you like these vivid images in your head of just like this alien landscape that this guy is traveling across. And it was just completely unique to anything else I've ever read.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
sweet. I love Unique.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. Um, all right, so we are done with the books that I wanted to pitch. Um, should we go into our initial thoughts on Mistborn with full spoilers?
With full spoilers?
Full spoilers.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So if you have not read Mistborn book 1 and probably 2, we're probably going to talk about 2 a little bit. Um, if you have not read those books, then I would turn this off now and come back when you have. But we have just started reading Mistborn. What are our initial thoughts on it?
So, I think my very first thoughts were, I don't know if I like it.
Yeah,
I read an hour of it, and then was like, I'm gonna switch back to the other book that I was reading. It's like I didn't. I understood it for the most part. I think I was a little confused in the beginning just because I think there was a lack of explanation, or either that or I just wasn't paying enough attention. But I knew that, like, man, it was such a slow starter. It took so long to get to a point where it grabbed me, and not like crazy long. I shouldn't say so long, but there was I don't know, an hour, 2 hours where like I was like fighting myself to just like continue, like just keep reading. It's gonna get better. And then it did. It got
yeah,
way better, and it got much more in depth. Once I knew that, and Spencer had to do a little bit of explaining to me before I continued reading it just to clear everything up. But once you once you learn the characters and see the way that they are set up, and the points of conflict, and how everything goes together, it gets really good. Like pretty much when Vin or when Kelsier like takes Vin under her wing, like that's what I
Yeah.
would say, where I was like, all right, this is gonna be freaking cool. So
Yeah.
she learns about her powers. She learns that she's special, like Mistborn, that she's got powers that not a lot of people do. Like, I don't know. So far in the book, I've seen 1, 2, 3, 5 Mistborn, and out of however many people, right? And then from there, yeah, it just gets super good. Kelsier, teaches her. She gets crazy good. Now she's just like ultimate killing machine, basically, for the most part. That's not really initial thoughts. That's a little later on, but
Sure. Yeah, I think I was in a very similar boat. And this I shouldn't say problem. I'm using the word problem very loosely. But this is kind of the problem with most fantasy is that a lot of fantasy kind of follows this style of storytelling that Mistborn is doing. We've been very fortunate so far to read like some really good fantasy that lays out a really good story that's pretty easy to follow and very fun and enjoyable. A lot of fantasy is a little bit more complex like this. And I don't, quite often I don't like it. Quite often I will, read, like start a new book and give like completely be like, all right, I'm done with this after like 2 or 3 chapters
yeah,
because I'm like, this is just not what I want to read. I want to read like the fun, like extremely interesting but easy to read fantasy. And a lot of it just isn't like that, unfortunately. So when I started this, I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is.
yeah,
I'm kind of following it, but it's very boring. And it was very slow to start. It kind of just drops you in this world and you let's see. It kind of just drops you in this world and you kind of just have to figure out what's going on or at least hang on for the ride until it explains it later on. And I usually don't like books like that. um, a lot of modern fantasy will give you context for everything. So
yeah,
like look at Kingstark Tidings. Um, Even though at the beginning you were kind of like, why is he in this fortress? And like why is this happening or why is that happening? It still gave you context for what he's doing. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like
yep,
you still understood who all these people were. You knew that this was a kid who is in this fortress for whatever reason, and he was learning to fight.
yeah,
Um, uh, Now there's some fantasy that'll just drop you right in the middle, and especially a lot of older fantasy. I can't remember exactly when Mistborn was written, but it was one of Brandon Sanderson's first books.
mm,
So it had to be a while ago.
yeah,
And a lot of the older fantasy, which there is way more of than modern fantasy, kind of follows that same thing of like dropping you into this world and you just have to like figure it out for yourself and eventually it'll kind of explain things, but until then you're pretty lost. And
yeah,
so i I got to like chapter 2 or 3 and I was about to give up,
yeah,
and I was like, oh, I don't think I like this because I had done the same thing recently with the Poppy War, and I had started to read that, and I was like, I'll come back to this at some point, and I was feeling the same way with Mistborn. Um, and so I went to Google and I typed in when does Mistborn get good? And there was some Reddit page where somebody had asked the same thing. And the guy was like, oh, just hang in until the end of chapter 7 when Vin and Kelsier start training. He's like, you'll love it from then on out. And
yep.
I was like, okay, I'm like, the least I can do is
Just
give
give it
this
that
until
long.
chapter 7
Yep.
and just see what happens. And as soon as that happened, I would say even before that point, even before she started training with Kelsier, I was like, oh, there's something here. Like I don't know why, but I really like this.
Yeah.
And I still I still kind of hold true to that. Like, to be honest, I I'm sure I could give you a few reasons, but I am not sure why I like this series. Like I none of the characters besides Kelsey are like, oh, like I really, really, really like this character.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I really like this series
Yeah.
and I don't know why. um,
Interesting.
yeah. And like the whole plot of the first book, once the plot really opened up, like that was really like gripping and fun. Um, but other than that, like I really, really liked Kelsier. But
Mhm.
I still wouldn't say like, oh, he's not like a favorite character in fantasy for me. Um, so yeah, it was kind of interesting reading these, and it wasn't like a downtrodden like I don't know why I'm reading these, but it was like I like these and I don't know why, but I'm
Yeah.
definitely going to keep listening to it and I'm definitely like enjoying it a lot. Um, I think the things that really do it for me in this book, if I really had to pin it down, is not the characters themselves, but the character relationships.
Yeah.
So, like her relationship to Kelsier and like how they would that like combined relationship of what they are making together
Yep.
and then like the combined relationship of Kelsier and Doxson and their like friendship and the combined relationship of Kelsier and Marsh. Um, and then it kind of goes into like all the other, it's like a big spider web of
Yeah.
relationships. Of course,
Totally.
like everybody is connected to everybody somehow. And then of course, Vin and Ellen is the thing for this second book that really has me continuing to read because I really, really like their relationship, and I'm
Yep.
really, really interested in the terrace woman that is giving Ellen
Oh,
advice.
it gets so good, dude. It gets so good.
so, I guess we already said full spoilers, but I am at the point where Ellen has just received the notice that the people are kicking him out as king.
Got deposed. Yep.
Yeah, getting deposed. And he is like sitting at the table trying to figure out how to get around it. Hmm. And and Vin and the dog are becoming friends.
Yep.
And she just told him that he can take another body if he wants to. And he's like, no, I'm okay with being a dog.
Yeah.
And that's about where I'm at. But yeah, I think the action in these books is very fun. Matter of fact, the I would say the point where I was hooked on this series was when Kelsier first shows off his magic
Oh, yeah.
and
I knew you were gonna say that.
he takes on like 8 obligators in that tower where he's trying to
Yep.
steal the safe.
Yep.
And he's got this iron bar and he's throwing the iron bar all around.
It's like
And
cutting people in half. Like it's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, I that was the point where dang, sorry guys, I'm getting tired. Um, that was the point where I was like, I really like the action in these books, and every time some sort of action comes up, it's very like you can imagine it really well, like the way they explain like pushing and
Yeah.
pulling
Yep.
on
Paints a
metal.
vivid picture for sure.
Like one of my favorites from this book was Vin. I can't remember if she was in the sky or if she was sitting on like the side of the tower or something,
Mm-hmm.
but Zane is out in the sky and he's got like 3 different points down below and he's just like slowly rotating
Yeah.
and
Yep.
kind of flipping and moving his body, and she's like, that is insanely hard to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And it explains like all the points of contact that he
The
has to make
control
and
that he
push
has to
and
have.
pull. And I'm like, oh, dude, that is such a cool idea.
Yep, it is super cool, man. The entire magic system in this book, I think, is so. I would say it's the most interesting magic system I have ever heard of, ever seen.
Really?
Just well, but just the entire idea of it, man. Like
Yeah.
allomancy, right? You have to swallow this chunk of metal, right?
Yeah.
And then with your mind, you have to burn the metal in your stomach, which then gives you these powers. And each metal gives you different power, different things, push and pull, and yin and yang, depending on the metals. I just thought that was really cool. Like I was trying to think of I'm thinking of like different magic, like Harry Potter. No, that's just mind magic. You just think and it happens. Harry
Right.
Dresden, think and it happens. Well, what are some other? There's some magics where like you have to have an object,
Kingkiller.
right? Kingkiller, yep, yep, and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think it's a really cool
Yeah.
magic system.
It's definitely it's probably not my favorite magic system. Just because limited is a bad word, but there is only a certain amount of things you can do. You can do
Yeah,
those things in really interesting ways
no, for sure.
and
Yep,
have like really, really cool like battles and stuff. And there's always like a counter to everything.
yeah,
Um, but it's probably not my favorite magic system just because like there's like in the Dresden books, there's like a limitless amount of ways to use magic.
for sure.
Um, and with here, there's like a certain amount of metals and they all do one or two things.
Yep,
Um, but I really like it. It's a lot of fun and I'm really enjoying it. I'm loving seeing all the different ways that she uses the metals, and every time she goes for a nighttime excursion throughout the city, I'm always
yep,
really enjoying when she's like pushing off of metals and flipping around
yeah,
and
yep.
doing stuff. I always like imagine that really vividly, and it's really fun. I
It is,
cannot
man.
wait, man, when they make this into a movie, it's gonna be so good.
Yeah,
Like I was originally thinking, I'm like, I don't know if the plot would exactly fit really well into a movie, but it probably would. But I think the most fun thing that's gonna come from the movie is seeing them push and pull off metals.
yeah,
That is gonna be so
yep.
cool.
I'd be interested to see how they portray it.
Yeah. I bet we'll get like a close up of a coin dropping to the ground and then it's starting to move as they like push against it and then seeing them flip, and it'll be a ton of sick action scenes.
Sorry, my internet just crapped out just for a second. I'm
Oh,
back now
really?
though. Yep.
All right. Well, um, so there was the first book. I almost wonder if he didn't know if he was going to write a second book. I feel like he wrapped it up really, really well, and it had a really satisfying ending to the first book.
Yeah.
But he left it just open enough in case he wanted to write a second one. Um, and so, with him writing the second one, I'm interested to see how it ends and how it sets up the third one. I'm hoping that it's not just like the second book it ends and then the third book is just like its own story arc. Like the
Yeah.
second one is kind of its own and the first one is kind of its own. I hope the second has like a big arc that goes across to the third book.
Yep. I would agree.
But it had a very satisfying ending when Kelsier died. I was like, oh my God. And I thought for sure when it first happened, I was like, oh, he's not really dead. Like there's
Yeah,
some
I
there's
did
some
too.
sort
I
of
had a couple
plan.
moments where I thought that too.
Yeah. And then when he actually died, I was like, oh my God. And it kind of revealed to the end, at the end of the book, it revealed how he had like this big plan this whole
Yep.
time,
That
and
was
that
his goal the whole
everything,
time.
yeah, everything was set in place for a reason. Um, and so I'm very interested to see what they're gonna pull off in the second book here as I make my way through it.
I'm very interested to see how the second one's gonna end.
Yeah.
I think I'm 2 hours away, so I'm
Are
just
you
trying to.
really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Remember, dude, I listen 10,
That's
11 hours a day at work,
yeah.
so
Um, the only thing I really wanted to say was I think the world is really interesting how they've set it up with all these different conflicts and all these kind of different players on the field.
yeah,
It's pretty standard for fantasy, but I think they did it, or he did it in a really interesting way, by having these inquisitors and how they're kind of on the same side as the obligators, but they don't really like each other and they interact in weird ways.
yep,
And like, what is an inquisitor, and how the nobility treat the ska, how the inquisitors treat the ska, and how basically the impact of how the ska have been treated for all these years, for generations and generations, how now they're like this cowed people, and they don't know how to like fight for themselves.
yeah,
It's a really interesting study in, what would happen if somebody did something like this.
for
uh,
sure.
pretty interesting. I'm That's probably the thing that drives most of my curiosity, is just the world itself, and what's going on in it, how everybody interacts with each other.
Yeah, the different factions interacting
Yeah.
with each other, I think is really very it's just great.
All right. Well, you got any final thoughts on Mistborn?
I don't think so. Not really a thought, but it's just a really good series and highly recommended. I would recommend it to anybody.
Yeah, I've heard it been recommended as like the staple of fantasy. Like if
Yeah,
you're like if there's somebody new to fantasy and you're trying to get them into it, like give
this is
them
what they need to
Mistborn.
read for sure.
I would agree. I would definitely warn them that the beginning is kind of slow and just to stick
Yep.
with it. But I would say that it's a good starting point. There's probably some other ones I'd recommend too, but I'd say this is a good staple of fantasy. I feel like it lays all of its cards out on the table for you to understand, and it doesn't complicate too many things.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, this is a good step on our way to more and more complicated or deeper fantasy.
absolutely.
Um, all right, well, guys, thank you for joining us for our second episode of the Fiction Files, or Fantasy Files. Sorry,
Fiction
uh,
files.
Fiction Files. Um, yeah, please join us for episode 3. I would assume that episode 3 is probably going to be our Mistborn discussion. We're waiting, like I said, we're waiting for our guest to finish up King's Dark Tidings. He should be on book 3 out of 4 by now, so hopefully we'll be able to get to that soon, and that'll probably be a 2-parter episode.
Yeah, no
I
kidding.
I have a ton of notes on that.
Probably
So
7 hours worth of talking that we could
yeah.
cram into those 2 episodes.
Well, guys, please, thank you for all the views last time. Please leave us a like or a comment. Tell us what you would like to see in future episodes, any topics you'd like us to discuss. Um, really looking for any sort of input that you guys might have. Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and have a good night.
Have a good night.